Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining this webcast from Watchful Software. I'll be your host for this morning or this evening, depending on where you are on your time zone. My name is Rui Vizcaya. I'm responsible for product management at Watchful Software. And the plan is for us to spend 30 minutes, no more than that, I promise, on the topic of the EU GDPR, the new data privacy compliance regulation. I have a couple of slides to show you while we're waiting for the rest of the folks to join in the webcast. As I was saying, I have a couple of slides to show you on what is it that the GDPR is and how does it impact your organizations, being them small or big. And also the idea afterwards is how RightsWatch, software security product from Watchful Software, is able to help you address and be compliant with the GDPR. I'll also try and do a little bit of a demo, live demo, sharing my screen on RightsWatch and how you can put that into practice, how you can have RightsWatch working for you in being compliant with the GDPR. And at the end of this 30 minutes, I'll try and save a couple of minutes for us to talk a little bit and for me to be able to answer to the best of my abilities to any questions, doubts, or issues that you may have. So first, a little bit of the house rules. You're centrally muted, so there's no need for you to unmute yourself. This is done so that we can all hear to perfection, and basically there's also no need for you to record or print screen or take any notes if you don't need to or if you don't want to. I mean, we will make this recording available on the watchfulsoftware.com website today, together with a PDF version of this slide deck. As I've said, at the end of this 30 minutes, please ask any questions using the control panel on the right side of your screen, the GoToWebinar control panel, and I will try and read them and answer to the best of my abilities. So moving forward, and because it's now 2 minutes past the hour, as I was saying, the idea is to explain to you a little bit, what the new GDPR is and how does it impact your organizations or your customer organizations. There are a couple of key points that the GDPR, the Governance Data Privacy Regulation, applies or enforces, better said, is that, I don't care or they don't care or the mandate doesn't care if you're a subsidiary or if you're HQ of a company. If there's a data breach, you can be fined for up to 4% of your global turnover, and this is massive, right? I mean, this represents substantial increase to whatever penalties or fines that are now in place in your own countries of origin. This is to be applied to any organization that handles EU citizens' information and data. Okay. So there's serious financial penalties that are going to be aggravated when the GDPR comes into play, and that is to be by mid-2018. So you have now, the rest of 16, 17 to prepare, and you really need to be prepared. Being you a large business or a small business enterprise. And why is it that the GDPR is also very serious and or a very serious matter for us to be prepared to, because it makes data protection the responsibility of every company. A company now is responsible for protecting the data, wherever that data is, being that data on your systems, being that data stored inside your organization, outside your organization, with third-party suppliers, etc. So you're now, as an enterprise, responsible and liable for that data, being you, as I've said, a small business or a large business enterprise. It also requires that you to report any data breach within 72 hours. So you need to report that data breach in its very short time frame. So first you need to understand that it happened, and then you need to report to the appropriate authorities to whom you report to from a compliance standpoint, but also to the citizens, to the users whose data was lost. So you need to, as I've said, understand what's going on, what happened, and how it happened, and you need then to report it in a very, very short time frame. You're also required to demonstrate that your security and data privacy procedures at any moment's notice. So you need to explain and detail and show that you have good IT security practices when it comes to securing your data and making data privacy cornerstone in your security policies. You need to show how those are implemented. You need to show how those are taken care in the day-to-day life. So there's not, it's not the question of having a very comprehensive information security procedure or methodology on paper. You actually need to have it implemented and show it to whomever that you have to report that into. And it also introduces new complexities regarding how companies should save, share, and track data. One of the key elements here is that you're also liable, as a company, you're also liable for any breach that may to data that is handled or stored or is being accessed by a cloud supplier of yours, for example. So you're also liable for any mistakes, any breaches, any misinterpretations, or any disregard for the compliance and for the protection of that data of that cloud service provider or any other third-party supplier that you have where your data is being sent to, shared with, or any other thing in that regard. So the idea is that not only as an enterprise you're responsible for that, but you need to be aware that everything that gravitates, everything that surrounds you upstream and downstream, especially when it deals with supplier chain, you're also liable for that. For those leaks. Of course, you've heard about, companies need to have to appoint a data privacy officer. That means, for example, that a person inside an enterprise is now personally liable if those data breaches occur. It's not just the company's liable, but a person that is appointed the data privacy officer is also liable if that occurs. So there's a multitude of scenarios, there's a multitude of issues that you need to be aware of and you need to take care. One of the questions that I'm always asked, and bear in mind I'm not a lawyer, and I don't do legal, so to speak. This is just a high-level introduction to the team, to the motto of this webinar. But basically, one of the fundamental questions that I get asked every day is, does it apply to me? I'm a UK enterprise. Brexit is down the road, so I'm moving out of the EU zone. So does that apply to me? And bottom line, even if you're not in the UK, every company that handles EU citizen, data is targeted with this GDPR. Wherever they're based, wherever they're located. I don't care if they're in the US or wherever they are. If they handle that EU citizen personal data, no, they should be compliant. They need to be compliant with that GDPR. And that means that all the businesses are now fully accountable for protecting any data classified as personal. And then you have all the flavors, so to speak, of that. What is personal data? PII, PHI, PCI, etc. All the P's in the world that we've learned to understand what they mean. The idea is that all that information needs to be protected, and we all understand that while that data sits in a database somewhere, sits in a protected system, structured system, it's easy or fairly easy to protect. Once it gets out of those protected environment, of that protected bubble, and it's turned into an unstructured data file format, then it gets more complicated. And so you need to be able to demonstrate, and you need to be able to show and to have in place procedures and norms and ways and solutions and technologies altogether that allow you to control not only that structured aspect of that P data, of that personal data, but also the unstructured flavors of that data. And as I was saying, the thing that strikes me the most, to be honest, on the GDPR, besides lots of other things, it's really the fact that you're liable as a company with those third-party service providers or cloud storage or cloud services, and you are now you have shared legal responsibility for those suppliers' data security measures. So you really need to choose wisely and choose carefully, and more than that, just help them and the other way around, and them helping you in making that data secure, protected to the best of their abilities and yours. If that data that is yours stored by them is leaked, you're responsible, or the other way around. So the idea is that there needs to be a joint effort in protecting that data by whatever means, shape, or form. And again, we're not talking about technology at all. Basically, we're talking about approaches. We're talking about ways to have a combined way to protect that data, whatever that data is. And bear in mind that that data needs to be shared, needs to be stored, needs to be used, and needs to be reasoned with. So you need to understand, or we all need to understand, better said, that that data is not just to be stored and locked down in a safe somewhere. That data is there for a reason. It needs to be consumed, so to speak, and it needs to be shared amongst people and systems. And those people and systems, they need to reason over that data, so they need to understand and leverage that data for their business purposes. And that's where we need to be careful on what measures, technologies, procedures, etc. Are efficient, and the ones that are effective to addressing the problem. So one of the things that we believe at Watchful that will do the trick, to the extent that it will help you, it won't allow you to be fully compliant with the GDPR. It's not a one solution that will fix all your problems or help you be compliant in all the angles and all the approaches to the GDPR. But RightsWatch is really one of the cornerstones elements into that protection capability, and that leads, or that is derived from data classification, classifying your data. So to cut a long story short, the idea is that if you're storing data, the best way to protect that data from falling into the wrong hands, or if you're sharing data and to protect that data from being accessed by people that do not have the need to know or should not have access to it, is by definition encryption. And there are multiple flavors of encryption out there. The one type of encryption that basically allows you to still have access to the data and controlling who you are by your authentication capabilities, and allow that user to print but not copy, copy but not forward, access that data for X amount of days or weeks and not longer, for example, is very powerful. And that capability from a digital rights management capability is very powerful. What it lacks is the policy-driven capability to apply a specific encryption template or a specific access rights template to the data, because the user needs then to choose which template to apply, which access rights capability to apply to it. Data classification being upstream to that encryption drives that encryption and helps that encryption work better. Basically, you're labeling your data. Basically, you're protecting your data and you're knowing what your data is. You're labeling, you're tagging it, etc. And if you want to, if that data is P something, is sensitive in nature, then you are automatically protecting it by applying, encryption into it. Okay. There's three fundamental ways that RightsWatch will help you in addressing the GDPR. I'm trying to, in the following 3 slides, I will try to depict a little bit of those, and then we can discuss it and take a little bit further on the Q&A session. Identifying and classifying that data. So you need to identify it, classify it, so you can label it, so you can tell that this is sensitive in nature because it has, you know, a social security number or a credit card number or a passport number or something, or a patient number or record or something that is highly sensitive in nature and should be protected according to the GDPR. So RightsWatch allows you to automatically identify that sensitive data whenever that data is received, handled, or shared in an unstructured data file format. So it's not about those secure containerized environments where you have it in a database somewhere and then you can look it up on your system. That's fine. It's protected. Whatever you have, you should have it. It's good IT practice from a security standpoint. But what happens if someone just copy and pastes that into an email or into a notepad or into, you know, whatever other file format that is of an unstructured nature? So the ability that you have to identify and classify that data, applying protective markings and text descriptors and labels and whatnot, so that that data can be better understood and reasoned with by a human or any other system that needs to reason over that data is very powerful, and RightsWatch allows you to do that. The objective is that it decreases your corporate liability while at the same time it trains and educates your users about that need to classify it. Why was it classified in a certain way, and ensures that those users adhere to the security policies. Now, this is all very interesting, so identifying and classifying, but how do you do that? You do that via a policy-driven, role-based access control approach. That means that it's not a user that chooses to classify that email in a different way or in a specific way or that file or share that file in a particular way, shape, or form. The idea is that from a policy-driven capability, you will have ways to identify those PIIs, PHIs, etc., and apply a classification driven by the identification of that sensitive content. But depending on who the user is, different classification levels may be applied because that user may in fact not have access to that data. So I mean, it should be off limits, so to speak, for that particular user. It's not just about classification, it's also about blocking the access to specific files, or even depending on the context, like how am I sharing, how is the user sharing this file or email or whatnot. Maybe the user is able or allowed or should be allowed according to policy to save that file to a corporate server, but not to a cloud-based drive somewhere, or like iCloud, Dropbox, or anything like that. It really depends on how do you enforce it also from a roles-based approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Well, it should not be a one-size-fits-all type of approach from a data classification standpoint, not just regarding what the content is. That's cool, that's interesting, reading from the content, but also the context, who the user is, in which situation is that user trying to access that data, etc. So it's a combination of these two factors where data classification can really help you in addressing the GDPR. Last but definitely not least, the idea that you have to know the W's. The W's means basically the who, the what, the when, etc., and to log that into a SQL or into a database somewhere that you can later or in real time extract information and knowledge from. Whatever you're using, from a SIEM tool, security incident and event management tool or whatnot, or something that could correlate events and extrapolate information out of those data logs, RightsWatch will be able to feed that tool or that way of doing that from a gathering and knowledge generation. And this ultimately enables the generation of reports, alarms, basically enables you to meet that 72-hour deadline that you have to report that breach. But also, if you're doing this on the fly, it could also mean that depending on any other solution systems that you have, in there, together with RightsWatch, it will allow you to mitigate actions, to deploy mitigation actions to stop that breach from happening. Well, maybe. Okay, depends if you're able to get that information quick enough, and if you're able to understand that information and generate knowledge out of that information quick enough. So we've been talking about RightsWatch, and we've been talking about how RightsWatch helps you specifically on the GDPR. But RightsWatch is a little bit more than that, or a lot more than that, I dare to say. RightsWatch is a policy-driven data classification and labeling technology. So it means that it's not users making decisions on which classification level to apply to unstructured file formats, but is policy rules driven by context, or a combination of factors that will ultimately drive that classification, allowing or not the user to override it, having or not the user sign the disclaimers for non-repudiation on those logs later on if you need to assess it and understand what happened. It's really a policy-driven data classification, and it will apply whatever policy and whatever classification schema and methodology and terminology and taxonomy that you needed to apply. Very simple, binary, sensitive, non-sensitive, or very complex taxonomy and terminology into it, which aggregates classification levels into scopes of reference, and then on and then on. Role-based access control policies in this case means that, again, any data classification policy out there must not be one size fits all. It needs to, yes, read from the data, reads from the content, and apply specific classifications to a specific file, but driven also by context, driven also by who the user is in that exact moment in time. What is the need to know of that user to that file in that exact moment in time, from a production standpoint when the user is producing the file or producing the content that will ultimately be generating or be placed inside a file, whatever that file is, but also from a consumption standpoint, someone that is producing, that is consuming and reading from that file. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's whatever you need it to be. So C-level execs, people that relate to compliance and GRC initiatives, or people that have that are related to a specific project will have different needs to know over sensitive data, over that PE data that we've talked. Dynamic watermarking and tagging is the way that you label and tag that data so that a user, a human person, a human being can look at the hard copy of that file and understand that it's sensitive in nature, classified, and was someone, what was the person that actually did that, and be able to reason better over that data, but also any other system that needs to apply all sorts of policies, being it encryption or TLPs or email gateways or firewalls or whatnot on that data file. So being able to reason better over that data. On the top right-hand corner of the slide, you have integration with other technologies. The idea is that RightsWatch alone is just one piece of this much wider enterprise security puzzle that needs to coexist with any other or multiple other technologies and approaches from a security standpoint. Those are, your data discoveries, your DRM tools, your digital rights management tools, your DLP tools, data loss prevention tools, your analysis and data analytics tools, your MDM, mobile device management tools, and whatnot. And they all have to have a coherent way of coexisting each other, although they are from different vendors, and they have to play the game of 1 + 1 = 3 and not just 1. We need to leverage each other, or those technologies need to leverage each other in order to make it happen in a way that makes perfect sense. The comprehensive audit trails here basically mean that you need to know the W's, right? As I've said, it's good enough that you can try and prevent that breach from happening, but let's face it, most of the times you won't be able to prevent it at 100%. You're mitigating risk, if nothing else, and you're trying to decrease the gap that you have against those threat vectors. So you need to understand, well, who is doing what, when, and how for forensic analysis purposes, for example, or even if you're, as I've said, if you're looking at these logs on the fly, you can mitigate or deploy mitigation actions, or even understand in a reasonable time frame what happened and what's going on, and try to address the issue while you still can. And definitely, last but not least, you have the ease of use. One of the fundamental pitfalls of data classification tools prior to RightsWatch are the way that they don't make it easy for the user. Or systems tend to ask for users to make decisions, to click on a couple of combo boxes and buttons and screen pop-ups, etc. And they don't make it easy. You need to make it easy for your users, because let's face it, your users do not have security on their job description. CISOs do, data privacy officers will do, but not your users. So the idea is that you need to make it really easy, embed it into their workflow so that they can do their jobs. Most of your users, if not 99% of your users, are good people that all they want to do is do their job. But if you ask them to click on buttons and combo boxes and whatnot, what will happen is that they will rebel against you, and this data classification, data protection, the GDPR ultimately will fail and will not fly, and your users, you'll be in a dire straight situation if that is the case. What I have to show you right now is I'm going to switch off from the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to show you two or three use cases, very simple use cases using RightsWatch for data classification purposes. This is not a comprehensive demo. The idea is that you get a first glimpse of what data classification can do for you in an everyday scenario. So I'm going to share my screen with you, not a demo environment, but whatever I use in my laptop every day using Watchful Software's information classification policy. But then afterwards, if you need more information, if you need more detailed demos, etc., you can reach out to Watchful Software and ask for it. Okay. So let's try and first of all open Word and show you how a user that is working on Word can really classify information. So I have a blank Word document. I'm going to try and save this document into, let's say, my desktop. And ultimately, what you can see here is RightsWatch working. And the idea is that there's a 4-level of classification matrix here that reads that information can be public, internal, confidential, or secret, and then can be aggregated into scopes. Scopes means a much more complex segregation of access to information based on projects, based on departments, etc. But in this case, let's stick with the basic 4 levels of classification, which may be 3 or maybe 5 or 7, depending on how much of the need you have for it. And you have tooltips underneath that is always explaining in whatever language that you must have for your users, explaining to users what's going on. In this case, it doesn't have any content. And I'm a user that is not doing anything. I'm just working on this Word file. So by default, you have a public classification chosen to me. I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm going to type in here, I don't know, some Latin here. This is not sensitive in nature. I'm going to try and save this, and you can see there's still public classified information there. But if somehow I type in WSW confidential here, and this for demonstration purposes, we have this here, WSW means Watchful Software, it will trigger a confidential classification into it. I didn't do anything. All I did was type in and just click the save button. Now I'm trying to save a confidential document in my desktop, right? And I can do this. I can even try and change the classification. So I'm going to try and downgrade this into public. And you can see that the save button is grayed out. I can no longer save this until I sign a disclaimer for non-repudiation that later on, yes, I acknowledge I'm overwriting a security classification that was given to this file by my Chief Privacy Officer. I'm going to click no for demonstration purposes, and now, for example, I'm going to try and save this into my Dropbox folder, right? I'm now trying to save the very same file into a cloud-based drive. Now I can try and save this and make it public, the idea is that the tooltip changes because you're not allowed, well, watchful software people are not allowed to save confidential information inside cloud-based drives. So depending on, where am I saving this file? With whom am I sharing this email, etc.? You can have different policies being applied that will prevent that email from being sent or will automatically stop that file from being saved or shared, etc., etc. Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to save this into my desktop. I'm going to stick with a confidential thing, or even try to classify it as secret, just to show you the dynamic watermarking and labeling capabilities. I'm going to save this into my desktop. And what you can see is that it will automatically classify the file and even apply dynamic watermarking headers and footers, and even whole 9 yards in terms of tags specific to me, or specific to my IP address, or specific to whatever other classification or policy that needs to appear here, so that even if this file is printed, if I have the printing right active, I'm able to understand, or other people are able to understand what happened. I'm also able to, if I click on custom properties and advanced properties, I'm also able to add tags onto the custom properties so that other systems like DLPs, email gateways, or anything like that can apply all sorts of policies into the file. Okay. We don't have much more time. There's 1 minute left. I really want to give us time for questions. And while I show you what makes RightsWatch different on the screen, I'm going to try and see if there's any questions into the audience. So this is now the time for you to type in your questions on the questions control panel from the GoToWebinar. And while people are typing those questions, there's no question right now, but while people are asking those or typing those questions, let me just emphasize that the ability from RightsWatch, that RightsWatch has to apply those data classification and labeling role-based policies is really key here. It's really what's driving then the protection and the enabling you to be compliant with the GDPR. There's also ways for you to prevent your users from bypassing or uninstalling that system from their handhelds, or even their mobile, their laptops, etc. And there's a unique integration from RightsWatch into their workflows, into the user's workflows, so that it prevents and decreases the learning curve. There's all sorts of other aspects here. We have Hate here that can help you. There's a couple of questions that I'm going to try and answer right now. Again, as I've said, you will have access to the recording of this, and you will have access to the slides also. So the first question is, how can RightsWatch assist with data classification on a data store in servers? That's an interesting question, Nancy. Really what I've shown you is the client side of it. But if you have data that is stored in servers somewhere, you can ask RightsWatch in the background to go and classify those files independently of any user interaction, and also driven by policy, driven by data discovery from any other tool, or just by pointing RightsWatch, the Global Protector initiative and capability of RightsWatch, into those servers, and allowing RightsWatch, so to speak, to digest those files and to apply policy to those files in a transparent way to the user. So basically, it's an admin task via a command line interface that will automatically classify those files on those servers. There's also another question from Kevin that can you use this software to monitor third-party suppliers that you share data with? Yes, you can. I mean, if you're sharing data with those third-party suppliers, basically you want to be able to share information back and forth. You can onboard those external users, externals as we call them in jargon, into the system without even having to add them to Active Directory or place them into groups or federate in any way, shape, or form. So there are ways that you can onboard those externals and make sure that you're controlling and you're recording, you're logging, whatever that they're doing with your data on those interactions with that data. Nancy, another question from Nancy. Can it also be used to check all applications where data was saved? Well, basically yes and no, Nancy. Let me be completely honest with you. RightsWatch is not a data discovery tool, nor will it ever be, right? I mean, you can use Spirions, you can use Varonis, you can use, even a DLP. Some DLPs have that capability to scan your data and to automatically apply or to tell you where those are and which classification are they sensitive and not. Then you can, if you have one of those, then you can ask RightsWatch to go to those locations where it found your data and automatically classify that data. So basically the short answer is, will it tell you in which applications it was saved? Some of them. If your users are trying to save that data into Dropbox or network drives or even file shares, etc., yes. Outside of that, it's really the realm of a data discovery tool, not really what RightsWatch is about. But again, as I've said, this is a puzzle game. It's a game of adding pieces into the puzzle and make it happen. So RightsWatch with data discovery, yes, the answer, it could be done. Any document time limitations from Aaron? Well, there are some document type limitations. Again, the idea is that whenever RightsWatch has a plugin available to, which is for Outlook, for Mac, Outlook for Windows, for iOS, for Android, for BlackBerry, we can control that email, even webmail on the Exchange server. And also when you're talking about the Office suite, Words, Excels, PowerPoints, we can control and there's no limitations. When you go outside of those traditional file formats, when you go into PDF, can you control PDFs? Can you classify PDFs? Yes, you can. What about image files? What about those binary files like notepads? So that where it becomes, or CAD drawings, that where it becomes a little bit more cumbersome from a data classification and protection standpoint. So let me give you the gist of it. When you get into image files, RightsWatch enables a technology that will classify those image files and make sure that classification travels with those files, wherever those files are. Now, if encryption is applied, then you can rest assured that whomever that should have access to that will, in fact, have access to that. So the classification is never lost into those image files, JPEGs, TIFF files, PNG files for the matter, okay? Other file formats like notepads and the likes, drawings, basically what we're doing right now is leveraging a technology called alternate data streams. And for those that are more technically knowledgeable, alternate data streams, it's very easy and powerful if the file sits in one place. But if the file is moved around into several places, then it becomes a little bit more complicated. And that property that is attached to the file is lost. Where, as I've said, RightsWatch is working on, is already available with that persistent classification that is never lost on image files. And later meaning next year, we will work on the very same concept going outside of alternate data streams to protect those file formats also without losing that property. Without losing that property, I mean when those files are moved around or are attached to an email, saved into a USB stick or anything like that. Thank you for those questions. We've exhausted the time for 6 minutes. If you have any other questions, please do email us or send us a demo request or something like that. We'll be glad to answer to any questions that you may have. Of course, you can download a solution brief that we have available for you to download after this webinar, if not now, regarding how RightsWatch addresses GDPR and helps you with the GDPR. We will make this recording available, and we will also allow you to have access to the slides. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending. Hope to see you next time.